Welcome everyone to Spirit Coffee Talk. I'm Ginette Biro, and with me is Elyse Catherine, and we are two of the three mediums of Spirit Coffee Talk and Avalon Spirit. And we are going to be tackling a Q&A question that I'd put out a little while ago. And this one was really neat, and I was hoping to have this as a discussion because there's so many ways that we can experience this. So I'll read the question. So it says, does our intuition warn us of negative things, or is that always the ego? For example, if you are in a rough neighborhood and you get a sudden sense of danger, is that your intuition warning you of danger, or is that your fear-based ego speaking in your brain? Another example is you feel you should not trust someone because you've been screwed over several times. Is the distrust intuition or ego speaking? I think this is such a great discussion.
Such a good question.
We've all had experiences in this, and yeah, I'm excited to dive in. So, what do you think? Where do you want to start?
I think there's so many aspects to this question. It's such a good question because I feel like it's something, like you said, that we all end up pondering one time or another. And I think to start with the fact that like the fear response and our fear brain and like our fight, flight, freeze nervous system response is so powerful. So like almost anything can give us a fear response. And so as people, when we're trying to, develop our intuition, and I think even when we are like, I don't want to say fully developed because like you're never, but like when you feel like you're at a place where you like trust your intuition pretty good and you're like, I think I have a pretty good handle on like what is what, this is still an area where I think we have to like discern, because I know for me there's times where I reach out to you and I'm like, my brain can't tune in on this because of fear of X, Y, and Z. I'm too close to it, or I've had a history with it, or I know consciously that I have a tendency to drop into a fear response in this place. So I'm not even going to try it because I don't think I'd trust what I'd get anyways. So then that's when I reach out to you or Lisa or some of my other intuitive friends to be like, hey, can you tune in on this for me? This is kind of what I'm getting, or I maybe have a feeling, but I'd be curious what you get, just to kind of be a check and balance, because I think it's a hard, I don't think it's like a one and done, this is how you do it and this is always going to be how you discern. I think it's a very gray area when it comes to intuition and fear and what's fear brain, what's not.
Yeah, fair point. And I think going off of that, I think too that it's about figuring out patterns within yourself that can give you kind of a direction of fear or intuition. And the only reason why I say that is because I've learned over time to pay attention to when is it fear, when is it intuition. And again, like you said, there's times where it's not easy and I can't determine that for myself because I am in a fear response, but it might be intuitive also. It's all mixed up. But what I usually try to do in those situations is I will recognize that fear in my body is chaotic. Like fear feels like arms and legs kicking in every direction, right?
Yep.
That's what it feels like. Whereas intuition feels grounded and sturdy. And so if we take like walking in a dark alley, if everything is on fire like this, that's usually my fear response. Whereas if I have like a grounded, intuitive hit of like, get out of here now, not that that's a peaceful, like, get out of here now, right? Like it's like a move now, fast. But it's grounded, then I know there's like an intuitive thing. And so I've figured that out over time in the patterns, and I try to feel into which one it is now, and I can do it better and better based on the situation. But I know sometimes there have been situations where, like, if it's something very close to me and there's this huge fear response that kicks up, I have to then really pause and really try to disassociate from the arms and legs kicking to see what's happening. And sometimes the intuitive hit will echo that, but sometimes it'll be like very, very grounded. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember there was a time where I was walking in a proverbial dark alley and there was a group of people specifically all men. And I was walking by myself, and it was like not dark, but not light either. And I had a fear response of like, I'm uncomfortable walking by myself through this group of people, but like it's the only way I can go. And I could tell, and this is where I think starting to practice and get in touch with the way it feels in your body is helpful, because our brain is good at telling us all sorts of stories about all sorts of things and being like, this is the truth, and it's really not the truth. Whereas I feel like our body can discern a little bit more what feels like what. It's not that it won't lie to you, but I think it can have a louder, clearer signal that doesn't get as bogged down by thought process, if that makes sense. And so anyways, as I was walking down this proverbial dark alley, I had this fear response, and I was like, huh, and I could feel my brain go like, this is sketchy. You don't want to be walking here by yourself. And then I remember there was this internal feeling in my body of like, okay, well, you're already here. Stand up straight, pull in. And I had this like strength feeling internally where I was like, set my shoulders, walk really strong, and have like empower yourself internally. And I was like, okay. And all of a sudden I had this like feeling where I was powering through, and it was fine. Like nothing happened. It was all good. I think there was a couple things that were said, but it wasn't, it was fine. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I got to a different place, I could feel that response in my body settle, and I loosened up, and I was like, okay, we're all good. And so in that moment, was it probably a bit of a fear response, being like, oh, this is kind of could be potentially a sketchy situation? Probably. Nothing bad happened. Like not even for a second did I really feel unsafe, really, as I was actually in the situation. But there was still an intuitive response of like, okay, let's set yourself up for safety here. And so I called forward an energy within myself to kind of feel strong and safe within my own self. Or like if something was going to happen, I have this like strong energy within me that was like, don't you touch, like, don't go there. Mm-hmm. And so that helped me carry it through. So I think there's situations where it's like your intuition can also, and your spirit can also step in to support, hey, this is an ego brain type of fear, but let's support you through it anyways. Because sure, maybe there is potential that it could be a little bit of a sketchy situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think too, that the more that we kind of give ourselves the opportunity to explore, like, is this ego or is this intuition? The more we bring that into like daily or weekly experiences, the more we can then discern in those moments when it's a high intensity one, right? Versus a low intensity. Like, for example, say you have to go get some blood work and you really don't like needles. So you have the fear response kick in. You can take that opportunity and be like, okay, is this fear or is this an intuition that, something bad is going to happen? And like, you can sort of train yourself to decipher between the two. And I think there's beautiful lessons in that, because it can help us really dismantle the ingrained fear response, because our ego is designed, like we've talked about, to keep us safe, right? Like it's a built-in safety system that can totally run amok, though, if we don't give it boundaries and parameters, right? So I think if we actually spend time creating what those parameters are and feeling them, like you said, through the body being the greatest way to interpret it, we can then kind of stay on top of it versus it running us over.
Yeah. I had another example where my partner has a brain tumor, and he has had it since I've known him. And we go for scans. Well, he goes them. I just go with him. I don't get scanned also. You get scan us both.
Like, hey,
while we're here. And it's stable and it's been good for a long time, but we go for scans every so often. And I remember there was a time, anytime we lead up to a scan, I start to get afraid. I just do, right? Because I'm a human and I want him to be okay, and I want him to be healthy and well. And so there's always, even though my undercurrent, the grounded place in me is like, oh, he's going to be around for a long time and all is well, it still is scary, right? Of course it is. And so there's often leading up to the scans and until we get the results, I always am like a little bit on edge, to a lot sometimes. And I remember there was one time where we were leading up to a scan, and I was feeling particularly nervous. And my brain was like, you feel extra nervous because something's wrong. And what in actuality, I think well, it was twofold. One, it was after my dad had passed, and my nervous system was very heightened. I was going through a lot of stress. And I just, when that's the case, we tend to get these blinders on and hypervigilance of like, everything is going to kill me. I'm not okay. I'm not safe. And that could mean the loss of a loved one. And I had just gone through the loss of a loved one. And so I could feel this fear. And I remember there was this one day where I was like, I had kind of had days on end of like feeling anxious, waiting for this scan to come. But there was this one day where I was like, he's going to die. Something is wrong. And I was like, not okay. And I remember texting you and being like, can you tune in? Is something wrong? And you were like, no, like they're showing me like it's all good, whatever. But there was nothing that we could do to like confirm or deny because we were still waiting for the it was either before the scan or just after, and we were waiting for results. But it was, my brain was going bananas. It was so scared, but I could feel this warning, this like something is about to happen. And I could feel it as a steadiness internally. And I remember getting more afraid because I was thinking, oh, it's his brain tumor. Well, what it actually was, he was driving my dad's vehicle. We live in Alberta and the roads were terrible. And he was driving my dad's vehicle, and my dad did not have winter tires on his vehicle when he passed. And John was driving the vehicle, and it was like really mucky and slippery. And he was like almost at the same time that I was having this really intense, like intuitive as well as brain response, because both were happening at the same time. He was driving down a highway, and it was this big kind of high up truck that he wasn't used to driving, that type of vehicle. And it slid out, and he was like near miss of getting smoked on the highway by another vehicle, to the point where when he told me after it happened that like, I swear to God, it was my dad protecting him and being like, back on track. And also don't ruin my truck. Because that was his like pride and joy, was this giant vehicle. Last second, the car rights itself and this truck drives by him and he's safe. And he said, he's like, that is the most scared I have ever been in a moment. He's like, I thought for sure in that moment I was going to die, like fully for sure I was going to die. And so I use that as an example because it was like my intuition and my fear brain were both correct. It just, my fear brain was taking that feeling I was having and projecting it onto, oh, it's his scan. Something's going to come back and say his brain tumor is growing. When actually it was no, he was almost getting smoked by a vehicle. And, but he was also supported in staying safe. And I remember he didn't tell me until maybe an hour later when he got home what had happened. I remember feeling this like, I'm scared and I can feel my brain going, but I can also feel it in my body, in this like undercurrent of like, there's a potential for him to exit very soon. But then it kind of like settled and subsided. And then, hour and a half later, he's like, yeah, I almost died on the highway, like legitimately thought I was going to die. And that was a scary example of, okay, there's a lesson for me of how that feels. I could feel my brain telling all these stories about how, who, what, why, when, where. But I could also feel it in my body. Yeah. And so we can have both. And I think that's also why it makes it so tricky, because when we're talking about the fear response, it's so intense and is just trying to keep us safe. And we don't want to ignore it if we really feel like we're in danger. It's better to always be safe than sorry. But it's like you said, starting to learn and to be able to discern what feels like what. And why does it feel that way? And what does that look like for me? Because it's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah, totally agree. I have two situations that I want to share too. And one of them is recurring. So this is one that I have to deal with kind of routinely is my son plays hockey. And when I go watch his games, like they're starting to get more rough at this age, which is fine. Like I'm all for, like, I tried playing rugby. I'm not afraid of sports. I think everyone should play sports if they're into it. It's so much fun. But then there's this like motherly part of me that every time I go to the hockey game, I sit down, I'm like, what if he gets hurt today? And then I have to catch myself right away and be like, that is your fear brain talking. Don't tune into your intuition, or not, sorry, don't tune into the fear of it. what does your intuition tell you? And what I've actually been doing in that situation is this is beyond my control because he's already on the ice. So I can't even muck around in that. I can be present here in a calm energy and enjoy the game. Right. So like that's one where I have to kind of step away from both of them because it's beyond my control. Right. And so it's just this motherly thing that I have to routinely do. And I thought I would get over it, but it's just there all the time. So I have to consciously choose every time. Another one, though, where it was a very dire situation that I had to work very hard to tune into. And I think I've shared this story on Spirit Coffee Talk before, is when several years ago, my husband was on this like month-long hike around the PCT trail in the States, and he went missing for 5 days. Right. And so before he left on his hike, he said to me, I'm going to check in with you with this GPS attachment to my phone. I will leave you coordinates of where I am every night, just so you have the numbers. It'll just be number coordinates. And he'd sent it to several family members and like, I'll check in on this website. You can find it here. Like he made a big deal about it. And I had said at first, don't worry about checking in, just go. We'll see you when you get back. He's like, no, I want to. So I was like, okay, cool. So the first 7 days, I get the coordinates every night, all cool. And then all of a sudden, one day I don't get them. I'm like, you know what? It's okay. Sometimes like the satellites aren't connecting and whatever. Long story short, 5 days goes by with no check-in. I'm starting to have to hunt him down. Fear is building in me big time. Over like day 3, 4, and 5, fear was at an absolute max because now I had registered him as missing with the sheriff's department, with the local police department there. And I had all the family members contacting me regularly saying, have you heard from him? What's going on? And I'm like, I filed a missing persons report, right? So right in the thick of like massive fear, because I'm like, I have 2 young kids now, and now I'm going to have to explain to them that their dad went missing or that dad died and we can't find him. Right? So this like huge fear. But that's when I started, that was my introduction into really feeling the difference between fear and intuition, because I was so desperate that I went to Spirit. I'm like, listen, I'm terrified, but I need to tune in on, is he okay? And every time I tuned in, it was this grounded feeling of like, yes, he's okay. Yes, he's okay. And I'm like, it doesn't make sense because everything else, like by now, after 5 days, this could happen and this could happen. And I tracked him back to where he'd picked up some like food resupply to, I think a week before that, right? Like all of the things. And by the end of day 5, randomly this message appears from somebody else's GPS. And he's like, hey, all is well. My GPS just wasn't connecting. A person I met on the trail that I've been hiking with for the last week and a bit has a GPS, so I decided to use it and check in. And then, so he was okay, which the intuition was accurate, even though all the 3D stuff was totally scary. He just thought at the time that it was no big deal that he didn't check in. Anyway, that's another story. But all to say is that really terrifying experience gave me the opportunity to feel that difference. And so since then, I've always tried to kind of like, I know I'm feeling total fear and everything on the surface looks like fear, but what do I also feel inside? And then there have been times where there is the fear and I tune into the intuition and it is a grounded, like, get out of here now, or this is not a good situation, or whatever it may be. So again, I think those opportunities to acknowledge the two, and then also though, release the parts in which you can't control.
Yes.
I think that's a big thing. Like if it's a dark area, like a dark neighborhood, and the feeling is to get out, well, you can control that in the best you can. Get out, move away from there. But when it's like your situation with John or me when I'm watching Easton play hockey, you have this understanding, but if you're not getting through your intuition what you can do about it, there's nothing you can do to intervene. And I think that's one part that we also sometimes need to let go of, because I know that from Spirit, if we're meant to intervene on something, we will be given the knowledge or the action to take to do it. Or we will randomly make the action without knowing. Spirit world has a lot of ways to do that. So when we have a feeling of things and then things transpire, but we didn't have enough information to do anything about it, is usually because we're not meant to know, but we picked up on a frequency of something.
Yeah, and I think that that's, I mean, your point about one, knowing when you feel a call to action of some sort, honoring that. Because even if it's your fear response, but it's a, then there underneath it, there's a like, okay, now leave. Honor that, right? You never know. There was a story, did you hear about there was a, I think it was Alaskan Airlines just recently had a, not an actual like door on the plane.
Yeah.
There's like a, it's like a fake door that then a plane can like have retrofitted to like add an extra door, but it's just a window.
Mhm.
Friggin' flew off in the middle. It was not the middle of the flight. They had just taken off, and the whole freaking window and like door thing opened up. The seat beside it, the kid, there was a kid sitting in the middle seat. His clothes, his phone got sucked off and pulled out of the plane, but he was fine. The seat beside the window was empty. That man had missed his flight that morning. I don't know the details of what that was, but the question would be, did something happen where, you know, he set his alarm and woke up late, or he, whatever, who knows what happened. But whether he had a fear response or not, Spirit was like, not your time, sir. Don't get on the plane
Mhm.
because something's going to happen where you're going to like get sucked out of a plane. When does that happen? That never happens. That's craziness.
Yeah.
So we have to also remember that like we're being supported in those things, but also trusting the action that you feel, whether it's, is this my fear or is this my intuition? If you're feeling called to do something to get out of a situation to keep yourself safe, just honor that. Just
Mhm.
honor the call to action of safety.
Mhm.
Um, to your point too, you know, and I know I've talked about this on Spirit Coffee Talk before. Before my dad passed, Spirit over years gave me almost every piece of his passing, like every aspect of how he was going to pass, when he was going to pass. Yet they gave it in ways where I had absolutely no idea how and when and where.
Like any
After the
way to
fact,
prevent it.
exactly. After the fact, I looked back and I was like, oh, okay. Well, I knew it was going to be in December. I knew it was going to be of a heart thing, even though he had no heart issues. I knew there was pieces of it that I had had for years prior that I just was like, I don't know, whatever. He's fine. He seems fine. Move on. Because there was never any, it wasn't my role. It wasn't my responsibility to intervene. It just happened that I'm an intuitive person that picked up on pieces of how and when his spirit was going to choose to exit. And so I think we're good at thinking we have more control than we maybe do. But then when we do feel called, like I was saying, to take steps, then honor those things and trust that, you know, if you're heading out the door and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I need to go back and get my bag. And then your brain's like, hey, nah, just go. And you're like, no, I need to get the bag. Just get the bag. Because
Mhm.
maybe you're delayed by 2 minutes and that's a really good thing for whatever reason.
I
It's
did
learning to honor those things.
I did literally that yesterday. I was leaving the house and I forgot something. I can't remember what it was. And I was locking the door and I was like, no, this could be one of those times. I'm gonna go
Mm,
get the thing. And I went back in, got the thing, left, and I just felt peaceful and forgot about it until you mentioned it
yeah.
right now. But it was one of those times where I clearly was like, no, there's a reason I need to go get this, whatever it was. It might have even been a bag. But
Mm,
yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that.
yeah. So the other piece of the question that I'm curious your thoughts on was in relation to people. So we meet a person, we bump into a person, you know, we're in relationship with someone, and there's a fear response of like, I don't trust them, or there's something in me that's like, ugh. What are your what are your thoughts on that as far as, because I
Yeah,
feel like that's a tricky one.
it is a tricky one. And I think,
So I'll make you answer first.
yeah, I know, right? Um, if it's somebody that has repeatedly done a certain action and until proven otherwise, I expect the same, right? So, like, if somebody continually does the same thing, say they let you down, to think otherwise for me would be silly
Mm,
until they prove their actions speak louder than words, until they prove it can be another way. So that's one thing. And I also always think too, if you get a certain feeling from somebody that's like, not my jam, or don't want to be connected in this, like I will usually trust that until proven otherwise. And it doesn't mean I'm judging them. Like what I've really tried to work to do now is, instead of judging like that person's bad because I get the no vibes, that's not the case necessarily. It just might be they're not the right vibes to mesh into my life or my direction or where I'm going, right? Until proven otherwise. So I always just give myself the time to feel what I'm feeling from somebody. Again, if it's a repeated pattern, I trust the pattern until the pattern is broken. I mean, and that's me trying to give a black and white answer.
Yeah.
For you.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's also, we can have intuitions about someone or an experience with someone because we've had it before, maybe in a past life, maybe karmically, and that can, create a fear response as well, especially if intuitively we're like, oh, this is going to be a tough relationship. Maybe it is a tough relationship. And again, we're never saying like, keep yourself in a tough karmic relationship if it's like abusive or toxic or anything like that. That's not part of the lesson. In my opinion, if you're in a situation like that, the lesson is to protect yourself and GTF out of there and do your healing from that perspective. It's never to like stay in it to help them heal. And I don't think that's the case. I think we need to like, you can send them off with love and light, but you can always center your own well-being and emotional well-being and physical well-being.
Yeah.
So that kind of caveat aside, I remember I had a relationship with someone and it was like what you would call a karmic relationship. And it was really awful. And I remember when we met, there was an intuitive like, oh, I'm connected to you, but like, oh, oh boy. And that brought a lot of fear up in me. That brought a lot of like, what if I get hurt? What if my heart gets broken? Da, 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 da. Those things did happen, but I was okay because it wasn't a extreme situation, but it was also unhealthy. But then I also learned a lot of things. And when it got to a point of like, you're done this lesson now, I had a resolve of, I'm out of here. I'm done with this. Yeah. And so where can we, it's like always going back to where can we honor the action that we're feeling? Sometimes our brain doesn't like the action, but, and that can sometimes be mental, emotional, somatic work that we have to do as humans because of hardwiring and fear of, whatever. But where we can honor the action that feels aligned within us, even if that feels scary, is sometimes where we need to go. And so I feel like this whole conversation is very gray, but it is.
It is. Yeah.
Because it's like every situation is so different. But can we trust that like if we're in our bodies, in our hearts, and our spirits being told to take an action, it's for your highest good. And so how can you honor that? Because you'll grow and evolve even if it feels clunky or unsure.
I get it. Makes sense to me. Not always easy, but it's like definitely part of our lesson in learning. And I also want to say that I think the more we know ourselves, the better we can discern ego versus intuition. Right. And the more open we are to learning what that looks like for us, because it can be completely different. Some people could feel their intuitive sense in their throat. Others might feel it in their tummy. Others might just get a wash of a feeling, right? Like whatever it is for you, just notice it and then allow it to become an indicator of something. And again, that's why it's like noticing the patterns over time. Yeah. Amazing. Cool.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, I think that's about it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us as always on Spirit Coffee Talk. Please do subscribe, share, leave comments or questions or topic ideas in the description box below, and we will see you again next week.